The United Nations Security Council has approved a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. This United Nations resolution comes after multiple rejections following vetoes by the US and later by Russia and China. The US abstained this time. The resolution was put forward by the 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council. All 14 members of the Security Council voted in favor of the resolution that demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, which is set to end on the 9th of April. It adds that this should lead to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. The resolution also seeks the urgent need to expand the flow of aid into Gaza, immediate and unconditional release of all hostages by Hamas militants, but the resolution did not make the ceasefire dependent on hostage releases, a linkage America has previously insisted on. The US has previously vetoed 3 similar resolutions. According to the US ambassador to the United Nations, the latest resolution includes edits requested by the US. But Washington could not vote yes because it did not agree with everything. And the backlash from Israel seems to have started. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now hit back at US. Netanyahu says he will not send a high-level delegation as planned to Washington after the US refrained from vetoing the United Nations Security Council proposal. The White House has expressed its disappointment over Israeli Prime Minister's remark, while stressing America's abstention does not represent a shift in policy. Moreover, the United Nations vote comes at a time when tensions are growing over a looming Israeli military operation in Gaza's southern city of Rafah, where nearly 1.5 million Palestinians are currently crammed and struggling to survive with severely limited access to shelter, food, hygiene, and even medicine. Let's now talk about this latest development. Our correspondent Jody Cohen is joining us from Ra'anana on the line. Jody, good to hear you. What can you tell us about Israel's reaction to the United Nations vote and why the US did not use their veto? Because we understand that the Israeli Prime Minister has cancelled a delegation visit to Washington.
Absolutely. Hi, Eric. So Prime Minister Netanyahu has called off this senior Israeli delegation that was supposed to be headed to Washington, and that's after the US didn't use their veto in this UN Security Council resolution vote. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister's office has said that the resolution didn't condition a ceasefire on the release of hostages, and said that the US decision, which Netanyahu suggested was a change in policy, gives Hamas hope that international pressure would enable Hamas to get a ceasefire without releasing hostages. Now, the US has said that they didn't support the resolution because it didn't condemn Hamas. But the abstention doesn't indicate a shift in US policy, which is that the releasing hostages should ultimately lead to a ceasefire. Now, the US ambassador to the UN has said that Hamas could achieve an immediate ceasefire by accepting a hostage release deal that's on the table. And White House spokesperson John Kirby has said that the US is disappointed that Israel has decided to cancel this high-level delegation.
Jody, have we heard anything from the Hamas militant group, and is the resolution likely to be binding?
So Hamas has praised the UN Security Council vote, and they've also signalled that they're willing to agree to an immediate hostage release deal, the terms of which we, of course, don't know as yet. Now, the US ambassador has said that she believes the resolution is non-binding. Defense Minister Gallant, who's already in Washington, so this is separate to the senior Israeli delegation that was going to be heading to Washington. So Israeli Defense Minister Gallant has said that he believes Israel has no right to stop the war until all the hostages are home. He said that before this vote was announced. And remember, the hostage release deal, the talks that are ongoing in Qatar, this is concerning the release of 40 of the 134 Israeli hostages that are being held in Gaza. War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has said that Israel needs to target Hamas in Rafah, and that stopping now would be like firefighters putting out 80% of fire. Again, this is a statement that he made before this resolution vote is passed. Defense Minister Gallant, in his earlier statement, appears to hint that if a Gaza war would stop now, then Israel would need to deal with the threat that's coming from Hezbollah in northern Israel. And commentators are suggesting that's because Israel would need to ensure that terrorists are not emboldened by a move to stop the war in Gaza.
All right, that is our correspondent from Ra'anana, Israel, Jody Cohen. Jody Cohen, thank you very much for talking to us today. Peter Kuznick is the Professor of History and Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Professor is now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show, Professor. So, for the first time, the United Nations Security Council has voted for a call for a ceasefire in Gaza after the U.S. abstained. Rather than using its veto as it has done on previous occasions, focus now is on enforcing the resolutions. How effective do you think this resolution will be? Will it stop the war?
Well, the UN Security Council does not have the ability to force this resolution to be accepted, but they can put pressure and they can put sanctions on the parties that don't abide by the resolution. This is now a legally binding resolution. It represents international law. So anybody who is opposed in breach of this resolution is transgressing against international law. That's very, very serious. Will the Israelis abide by this? We don't know, but the world at least is hoping that they will.
Professor, the White House reacted and said U.S. abstention on the Council resolution does not indicate shift in policy. But it seems Israel was not happy about America's move, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying he will not send a delegation as planned to Washington. What do you think will happen next?
Netanyahu accused the United States of betraying Israel by not vetoing this resolution. They had said ahead of time that that was the case, and they demanded the United States act. There's been a growing rift between the United States and Israel. Biden is under enormous pressure. He's sabotaging his own re-election. There are many groups in the United States, including young people, my students, as well as people of color and progressives, who are furious with the Biden administration for continuing to provide the money and the arms that are being used to slaughter people in Palestine. Those images are still on American TV almost daily and all over around the rest of the world. So Biden was forced to act finally. And when the negotiation was going on the wording up to the last minute, and they changed the demand for a permanent ceasefire to a lasting ceasefire. That gave the United States enough wiggle room that it could finally abstain on this resolution rather than veto it.
All right, I've been talking to Professor Peter Kuznick. Professor, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to us today.
My pleasure.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.